Okay, folks, welcome to the Will to Win podcast. I'm your host, Will Cook, and today I have a very special guest. His name is Joe Rao. You may know him if you live in Westchester and Putnam counties. You've seen him report on News 12. Joe spent 21 years as chief meteorologist and science editor at News 12. He earned 8 Emmy nominations, and he has affiliations with New York's Hayden Planetarium since 1986. He also travels the world chasing solar eclipses and even has had an asteroid named in his honor, the 20009 Joe Rao. We're going to talk about his remarkable career, his lifelong fascination with the skies, and what it's taught him about perseverance, curiosity, and life. Joe, welcome to the Will to Win podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I received your invitation while I was chasing a total eclipse of the sun in Europe a little while back.
Yeah, tell us all about that. Was the pronounced the Laboreal?
Le Boreal, yes. There's a French cruise line known as Ponant, based out of Marseille, France. And back in 2021, they approached me and asked if I'd be interested in joining their team. Most of the people who go on Ponant cruises speak French, but in 2021 they were taking a cruise down to Antarctica, and they had about 40 or 50 people who only spoke English. And they said, "Would you be interested in possibly coming on board and helping our English-speaking passengers out?" And I said, "Okay, well, I'll do that." And apparently, we didn't see the eclipse because it was cloudy down in Antarctica. But I enjoyed, my wife and I enjoyed spending 2 weeks cavorting with penguins. Uh, we went to one island known as Paulette Island, where it's only about a mile wide, but is inhabited by 200,000 penguins. And they tell you stay 5 meters or 15 feet away from the penguins. Don't bother them. Somebody forgot to tell the penguins that, though. It was kind of like going to Central Park in the summertime and having the pigeons waddle up to you for a few peanuts. That's basically what the penguins did. But it was a fun excursion. And about a year or so ago, Ponant approached me again and said, "Hey, there's going to be a total eclipse of the sun crossing Europe, and we'd like very much if you'd be interested in joining us for that." And I said, "Sure," and uh, ended up on board. It was my job to work with the captain to move the ship into an area where there weren't going to be any cloud cover. The eclipse was happening very near to the western horizon, but in spite of the fact that we did have some cloudiness and some haze, I was successful. I heard later on that there were several other cruise companies that simply stayed the course. They didn't have anybody to help them,
I don't.
with
Right.
the weather situation, and so unfortunately they got clouded out. But for our passengers on board La Boreal, we had an opportunity to see an amazing spectacle as the shadow of the moon passed over us for about a minute and a half in the Balearic Sea. So we had a great job, and I'm already signed on to do another cruise with them next year near the Rock of Gibraltar, believe it or not. So
Oh,
it's a fun, it's nice work if you can get it.
that's really cool. So what was the crowd's response to the totality? What was it like being that collective experience?
Well, there are umbrophiles. There are people who do this on a regular basis. They chase the shadow of the moon. They're lovers of the moon's shadow. I have seen 15. This was my 15th eclipse chase, my 15th total solar eclipse. And whenever totality comes, it's always the same thing. Ooh, ah. In fact, I once said to Lonnie Quinn at WCBS Channel 2, the chief weathercaster there, in advance of the eclipse that happened in 2024, he asked me the same question: "What is it like?" I said, "It's kind of like if you don't know what exactly is happening, if you just listen and not see, it sounds like an orgy." Because people are going, "Oh, ah, they got," but after about a half a minute, everybody settles down and does what they want to do, either watch with binoculars or a telescope or take pictures. But it is an amazing sight. No one should pass away before they have a chance to see the spectacle of a total solar eclipse. It's nothing like you've ever experienced before in your life.
Joe, what are the rules in terms of the eclipse, in terms of viewing it safely? How do you look at the eclipse and enjoy the experience without harming your eyesight, or what do you need to do?
You need to have special filters. You don't use sunglasses. You don't use Well, this is actually passe now because no one, I challenge anybody to tell me that they still have photographic negatives. Nobody goes to the drugstore anymore and gets their pictures and gets negatives on. But you need special filtration that will block off not only the visible rays that are coming from the sun, but the ultraviolet and infrared rays. Your eyes do not have pain sensors, so even if you're using a pair of dark sunglasses and you look at the sun and you see it as a ball of light, your eyes are still being burned without your being aware of it because of the infrared rays of the sun that are slowly burning your the retina of your eye. So you need to have filters that would block off not only the visible but the infrared and the ultraviolet radiations. But during totality, during the time when the sun is totally covered by the moon, you could take the glasses off and get rid of them because you can look at that point directly at the sun during the total phase of the eclipse. Many people are under the impression that the total phase is the most dangerous time to look. No, absolutely not. The time when the sun is in partial eclipse is when you need to block off those radiations. But once the sun is completely covered, take those glasses off and enjoy probably the greatest spectacle that you have ever seen in your lifetime, a total eclipse of the sun. What an exciting event. You'll know the darkness that descends in the middle of the day and what an eerie feeling it creates. And you'll see that waning crescent of the sun gradually disappearing as the moon fits itself across the solar disk. And when finally the sun is gone, a great crown, a halo, the corona of the sun becomes visible, streaming outward, ragged at the edge, streaks running through it. And when the corona first forms, you might see a flash of light as the last rays of sunlight sweep past the rugged, rough edge of the moon, creating a diamond ring in the sky. A total eclipse of the sun. An amazing, amazing sight to see.
So you've had a lot of experiences with these eclipse and totality. I think you've had 14 of them, I believe.
Well, this was the 15th.
This
The
was the
most
15th.
recent one in August of this year was my 15th total solar eclipse. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm
And
just a pike. I might point out I'm a piker, so to speak. If I had told you a half a century ago, 40 or 50 years ago, well, I've seen 15 total eclipses, that would have been that would have been an incredible number because so few people at that time saw that many eclipses. But in the years that have since passed, the eclipses have become a big tourist attraction. And there are people out there, as I said, umbrophiles as they are called, that chase eclipses around the world. And I can tell you that I know people who have seen 20, 25, 30. I lost one of my dearest friends just a year ago. He was in the Guinness Book of World Records. He had seen 35 total eclipses. In fact, when we were kids, he once told me, he says, I'm going to see every total eclipse of the sun until I die. And he pretty much kept to that promise. Proclamation. He went all over the world to see total solar eclipses, whereas with me, I've seen total eclipses when they were nearby or readily available, or when I was offered a situation like I have been with the Ponant Cruise Company. But as I said, there have been others who have seen far many more eclipses than I have.
okay, Joe, take us back to 1972. I think you were 16 years old. Was that your first eclipse?
That was my first total solar eclipse, and I was shown that by my grandfather. If any of you have the ability of finding back issues of Reader's Digest, in 1997, November of 1997, I had the opportunity to write a family values story about my very first solar eclipse for Reader's Digest called The Promise. In 1963, my grandfather, on a warm summer July morning, told me that there was going to be an eclipse of the sun later that afternoon. It was going to be a partial eclipse. In New York, we were going to see about 90% of the sun covered. But then he gave me my very first lesson in astronomy, celestial mechanics, by using his fist as the sun, the salt shaker as the moon, and the pepper shaker as the earth, lining them all up and telling me that later today the moon was going to get in the way of the sun and we were going to see an eclipse. And we saw the eclipse. It was a very warm, humid day. It was one of those kind of days where it was more clouds than sun. But at the point when the sun was at its most covered, 90%, it broke through the clouds briefly like a crescent in the sky. And when I saw that in the sky, I was amazed. And at dinner that evening, as my grandmother said, I was a little chatterbox. I said, "Boy, that was really something, Grandpa." And my grandfather said, "You know, I made a mistake today. I should have taken you to the zone of totality, which was in 1963 across the state of Maine." He said, "We should have gone to see the total eclipse." And then he told me about how when he was 16, he saw a total eclipse of the sun from New York City. There was a total eclipse that crossed through a part of the tri-state metropolitan area. He saw that eclipse, and now all these years later, he's telling me about how spectacular it was. And then he said, "If I get an opportunity, if there's another eclipse that's close by, I'm going to take you to see that." And in 1972, he took myself, my grandmother, my mom, my sister on a leisurely 900-mile trip from the Bronx. I lived in the Throgs Neck section of the Bronx back then. We drove all the way up, first to Montreal, and then after a night there, we went up to Quebec City, spent a night there, and then he took us up to the Gaspé Peninsula in southeastern Quebec, where we were able to see a total eclipse of the sun. Cap Chat, which is the name of the place in the Gaspé that we went to, I can describe to you best. If any of you have ever out there ever saw the reruns of the Andy Griffith Show of Mayberry, just imagine Mayberry in French. That's basically what Cap Chat was like. It was a small community, a population of about 2,000, that was on the day of the eclipse overrun by about 30,000 visitors from all over the world to see the total eclipse. And fortunately, where we happened to be, we actually set up outside of town while the city itself, or while the town itself got clouded out. There was an area of cloud cover that came in during totality. While they got clouded out, where we happened to be, the cloud broke for just a moment so that it allowed us to see the total eclipse through a small break in the cloud cover. And after that, my grandfather, when we went back to Quebec City after the eclipse was over, he looked at me and he says, "I'll bet you're probably going to remember this for the rest of your life." And not only did I remember it, but also I got hooked on total solar eclipses, and it can be very addictive. And so after that, I ended up again traveling around the world and seeing other total eclipses of the sun. So it all got started with me in 1972 when my grandfather decided to take me up to a place up in Quebec to see a total eclipse of the sun. And I want to point out to anybody who is a parent or a grandparent, don't ever overlook uh, uh, these little favors that you do, these little things that you do for your son or your grandchildren, because it may land in a big way with them and may start them on a career, or it may start them on a journey through their lives.
Joe, so next question. Is that when you fell in love with meteorology, or did that start before that?
Oh no, that started before that.
Okay.
In 1966, there was going to be a tremendous meteor shower. The name of the shower is called the Leonids, and it comes around once every 33 years. And so my grandfather, and I should point out, my parents split back in the early 60s. As a very young boy, myself and my sister, we ended up with my mom moving in with her parents.
Okay.
So my grandparents, that's where they lived in Throgs Neck in the Bronx. So really, I had my mom and I had my two surrogate parents. My grandmother and my grandfather basically took the role of my father, and did a lot of things for me as any dad would. So in 1966, he took me down to the Hayden Planetarium where we saw this sky show about this big meteor shower, and I got very excited. Oh, I want to see this big event.
Yeah.
And so the day of the big meteor shower, I came home from school, did my homework early because I had to be up at midnight to wait and watch for the shower to occur. And before I went to bed, I watched The Three Wise Men. I watched Tex Antoine on Channel 4, Tex Antoine on Channel 7, Dr. Frank Field on Channel 4, and Gordon Barnes on Channel 2, and they all promised me the same thing, that it was going to be no worse than partly cloudy for the eclipse for the meteor shower that night. So I went to bed, I woke up at midnight. My grandfather and I went outside, and I looked up, and it was totally overcast, completely clouded over. And I said, what happened? I said, I was promised, the three weather guys on TV said it was going to be no worse than partly cloudy. My grandfather said, Joe, the partly is over. It's cloudy. You're not going to see anything tonight. And I was so mad, not so much that I missed the big meteor shower, but because I was promised clear or generally clear weather for the meteor shower, and it turned out to be a farce. What happened? And the very next day, I went down to the local library and I said, this isn't going to happen to me again. I'm going to learn myself how all about weather. I'm going to learn about weather and meteorology, and so as a 10-year-old kid,
That was the genesis of it.
I took out books from the library. One of the books that on weather indicated that you could get the latest information, weather information, from your newspaper. Some newspapers have a weather map, and sure enough, back then, as is the case today, the New York Times prints a big weather map. Back then, it was the official United States Weather Bureau map with all the isobars and weather station symbols on it. And so what I did was, from that moment on, for the next 3 years, I would buy a copy of the New York Times. Back then, by the way, back in the 60s, the New York Times cost a dime. And
Wow.
I got $1 allowance from my grandfather each week. So I spent 50 cents out of my dollar allowance buying the New York Times during the week. And then on weekends, on Sundays, my mom would buy the Sunday New York Times for 50 cents. But anyway, what I would do is I'd bring the New York Times home. I didn't read the New York Times for the most part. Maybe I looked at the sports section. But I would go to the back, took the New York Times weather map, clipped it out, and I saved the maps. And I tell you that over a span of 3 years, I had collected over 1,000 weather maps. I put them in a boot box, not a shoe box, but a boot box. And from looking at the maps and through sheer extrapolation of the weather systems moving across the country, I started making up my own weather forecasts. And in fact, I ended up doing the weather forecasts at homeroom in junior and in junior high school and high school. Every day in homeroom, my teachers would reserve a little spot for me, and I would put the weather forecast up on the blackboard based upon the forecasts that I would make up from the New York Times weather maps. And that's what got me started in getting into weather and meteorology. I got hooked on meteorology because I missed out on a big celestial event back in 1966. And the funny thing was that in 1969, it was on a Friday in 1969, February of 69, I put on the blackboard using not just the regular chalk, the white chalk, but the big fat pastel chalk.
Sure.
I put in multicolors, blue and oranges and yellow. I put on the blackboard possible snow day Monday, and I wrote at the bottom that there was a storm that I thought on Sunday was going to hit and bring a lot of snow that could possibly close the schools on Monday. And I got to tell you, by that time I had a reputation at the junior high school that I was at. I went to Junior High School 101, Henry Bruckner Junior High School, and by that time everybody knew about my weather forecasts in the homeroom where I was. Even the teachers used to stop by and look at the weather forecast I would leave, especially near the time of a weekend. It spread like wildfire all over the school. Hey, did you hear? Rayo's calling for a snow day on Monday. We may not have any school. And there was this one teacher, very tall teacher. His name was Mr. Russo, very intimidating, and he had a deep voice. And I passed him the hallway, and he said, I understand you said we're going to have a big snowstorm this weekend. And I said, yes, Mr. Russo. And he says, I watched Frank Field last night. He says it's going to rain on Sunday. And I said, well, sometimes some people look at weather different ways. Well, he says rain. I think it's going to snow. And as it turned out, the storm in question was the famous Mayor Lindsay snowstorm of 1969, where the Weather Service had predicted a little snow changing to mostly rain. Well, it started off as snow, but it never changed over to rain. It stayed snow. New York got like 15 inches. It was unexpected. Everybody was caught with their pants down, so to speak. the sanitation department couldn't get the trucks out to clear the streets, and we had no school for almost a week. Almost a week. And when I came back, when the schools finally opened again, I was like the conquering hero. Everybody remembered the forecast I had made from the previous Friday. And I ran into Mr. Russo and he said to me, he said, you know what? You ought to be a weatherman. You ought to get into weather. And I said, well, maybe when I get into college and if I take the course. He said, I'm not talking about going to college. He said, you should be on TV right now. You outdid everybody on TV and radio. You should be the person who's been doing our weather forecast. But in any case, in time, I did go to a city college. I did major in Earth and planetary science, and I ended up skirting the boundary between both astronomy and meteorology. And as you are well aware, I eventually became a TV forecaster for News 12. But before I became a TV weather forecaster, I did radio. I was on radio for 17 years. In the New York metropolitan area, you could have heard me on WMCA, WABC, WPLJ, but the station I'm most recognized for was WPAT. That was the elevator music station. They used to play beautiful music at 93 on the dial, 93 AM and FM, and I did the weather for them for 11 years. And so, and also I finished out my career for 2 years on 1010 Winds, for God's sake. I was on the morning meteorologist on 1010 Winds in 1994 and 1995. And in 95, I said, enough with radio. It's time to move on to television. And that's when I got my start at News 12. And I was with them indeed, as you mentioned, for 21 years as their chief meteorologist and their science editor. So that's how it really all began for me in terms of weather.
Can you define meteorology for us? Like, what does that encompass?
It encompasses the atmosphere. It encompasses being able to be aware of the various changes in our atmosphere, the ability to be able to look at weather maps and be able to see where specific storm systems are coming from, or high pressure systems which bring us fair weather, or even to be able to diagnose whether or not we're going to have a long-term stretch of heat and humidity, or cold and snowy or conditions. It's fascinating for me, and it was fascinating when I started getting those, cutting out the weather maps in the New York Times, being able to follow how weather systems move across the country. It was very addictive and something that, like I said, followed me right on into high school and college. And after college, of course, I was able to get my foot in the door and get a job at a private weather forecasting service in Flushing, Queens. And then eventually that led to getting the TV job at News 12.
Wow. So let's jump into some specifics about weather. In terms of your career, what is one storm, an area storm, something that occurred in the tri-state, one storm that really sticks out for you, that it's just one of the most memorable events in terms of its impact and magnitude?
You know, I was very big into snowstorms. In fact, that's probably why I have to, you know, with with the Lindsay snowstorm, for example, the one that I had forecast that nobody else predicted. I actually forecasted that more with my heart than my head. I really wanted to see a big snowstorm, and I think that was the basis for my going out and sticking my neck out and saying that there'd be a big snowstorm. And in fact, I will tell you that when I got my first job in weather, my boss one day said, I want to show you some weather maps. You tell me what you would forecast. And I looked at the maps. Now I had empiricism. I had been forecasting professionally, but also I'd been watching the weather for a number of years. So I looked at the maps and I said, well, I'll tell you what. I said, I think we might actually begin as a little bit of snow with this, but the winds look like they're going to be coming in from the east off the ocean. So I'm going to forecast a little snow, but a changeover to rain. And he laughed out loud. And I said, what are you laughing at? He says, you just forecasted the Lindsay snowstorm. You forecasted what everybody else was forecasting for that day. And that's proof of the pudding for you that I wanted it to snow when I was in junior high school. When I put up that big thing, snow day possible on Monday, I was hoping that things would change a little bit to allow for it to snow, and it did. But
It did.
had I been looking at it with a more scholarly point of view and look at it the way everybody else was looking at it, I probably would have gone down the same road and said a little snow, but changing over to rain. Big snowstorms to me, I guess early in my life especially, was the most important, the most impressive. I still remember the snowstorm, the great snowstorm, the blizzard of 1978, which dumped 22 inches of snow in
Yeah.
front of my house in Throgs Neck. I remember the April snowstorm, April 1982, April the 6th, 1982, which came on opening day for the New York Yankees. No opening day for them. 10 inches of snow fell in early April in 1982. That was another memorable event. I remember as a very young boy, Christmas Eve, 1966, the Donner and Blitzen snowstorm, as it's known in weather annals, a snowstorm that dumped heavy snow on New York the night of Christmas Eve and was accompanied by lightning and thunder. And I still remember a guy down the block. His name was Charlie Dunahee. He was like 300 pounds. He got dressed up as Santa Claus, and he's plodding along in the snow that evening, and he came knocking at our door. He was collecting for charity. He was, I forgot what the charity was, but he was dressed up as Santa Claus. My sister, who was only 6 or 7 years old, saw that. Her eyes were like wide open. And like, it's Santa. and meanwhile, the backdrop, here it is snowing. It's coming down in buckets of snow. So and lightning and thunder too. So these are the memorable events that stand out. I guess snowstorms in my life. I was a big rooter of snow, and if there was the possibility of snow, you had me like jumping up and down. Like, oh boy, we got a big. Not so now. Here I am now. I live here in Putnam County. I live in a house which has a very long driveway.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I'm not happy when it snows heavily. I don't go out with a shovel. I have to go out with my snow blower and go up and down for an hour or so. And and many times, like this past winter, as I'm going up this driveway with a snow blower, I remember saying to myself, why was it when I liked this kind of stuff when I was a kid? But in essence, that was the thing that helped fuel my interest and my enthusiasm for weather, was those big snowstorms back in the days of my youth.
Yep. So that's awesome, and it's amazing when you get thunder snow like that. It says something about the atmosphere, right?
Oh yeah, to get thunder snow, you have to have a very unstable atmosphere and in fact, the benchmark of a storm that is intensifying very rapidly are thunderstorms. And so very often when you're looking at a weather map, even during the summertime, if you see the mention, or if you look on radar and you see a lot of thunderstorms congregating in one specific spot, you know that there's a big storm that is evolving. In fact, the most recent, we just came off of a storm where we had thunder and lightning and even a tornado sighting at Atlantic Beach out on Long Island. And
It's
if you looked at the radar when all of this was happening, what did you see? You saw thunderstorms, lots of thunderstorms brewing
cluster.
across portions of Pennsylvania, the Delmarva Peninsula, all the way up into parts of Long Island. So thunder is and lightning again is the benchmark of an intense storm. And sometimes during the wintertime, you see thunder snow taking place, and when you have a thunder snow event going on, snow could be coming down at the rate of 2, 3, 4 inches an hour for a brief period of time, and that's what they get up in the the so-called lake effect area in Buffalo and Rochester and Watertown, New York. You get these this very cold and unstable air blowing over the warm Great Lakes, and that produces the effect of very unstable, very intense conditions, which produce thunder snow and produce hour after hour after hour snow is coming down at the rate of 2, 3, 4 inches. That's why Buffalo and Rochester, they get like 30, 40 inches of snow sometimes in one sitting.
It's really isn't wind direction very important to set it up correctly?
Correct. For in Buffalo, for example, they're right down by Lake Erie. So if they get in the wintertime just the right kind of southwesterly wind, which blows directly over the lake, they get hit with lake effect snows. And interestingly, with Buffalo, It's not the whole city. It's the part of the city that's right in the direct path of that southwesterly wind off of Lake Erie that get clobbered with snow. There are other parts of Buffalo or environs, some areas just a stone's throw away from Buffalo. Parts of Buffalo get like 2, 3 feet of snow. Other parts will get only 5 or 6 inches. So it's an intriguing thing for us. Our snow wind is northeast here in the tri-state New York area. The north part of the wind brings in the cold air. The east part of the wind brings in the moisture from the ocean. You combine those two with a storm coming up along the eastern seaboard or passing to our south, you get a nor'easter, as they say in New England, and you get a heavy amount of precipitation, which, again, if it's cold enough, you get a lot of snow.
It's on the storm track, right? If the storm goes east or west, right? It might be rain if it goes too far in west.
Well, yeah. In fact, there's a snow line. I call it the Westchester waistline, uh, right along Interstate 287. Anywhere south of 287, you more often than not will see snow change to rain because there's enough moisture coming in from the warm Atlantic Ocean to do that. But as you go inland, far enough up into northern Westchester, or where I happen to be in Putnam County, Orange County, Rockland County, you don't get the penetration of that milder air from the ocean enough to change over.
Okay.
And so that's why, not on all occasions, but on some occasions, you'll see New York City. Well, we had snow, a few inches, but then it washed away because of rain. But up in our northern suburbs, Mount Kisco, you got 18 inches. You got Yorktown Heights got
Yeah.
12 inches.
Hmm.
A lot of places inland get hit, while places nearer to the coast sometimes will get only a little snow and more in the form of rain.
So, Joe, I know you love the snow systems, but talk about Floyd or Ida, some of those tropical systems that we've had throughout our history. Any of those really stick out for you?
Well, Floyd stakes out because I was at News 12, Westchester. This was in September of 1999, and Floyd became the benchmark for us for many years for flooding rains. Floyd was interesting because it was a former hurricane. It was a tropical storm. At the same time that we had the approach of Floyd, there was an old weather front that was located or draped right across the immediate New York area. And so Floyd came up, it interacted with that old weather front and literally produced a corridor of very intense, heavy rainfall. In Yorktown Heights, for example, a long time weather observer, legendary weather observer, Dr. Jerome Thaler, he recorded 12 and a half inches of rain in 3 hours. And other parts of northern Westchester recorded similar amounts. For about a day or so, you couldn't go anywhere in the lower Hudson Valley because it's interesting in the Hudson Valley, people ask me about what is the worst type of situation. It's not snowstorms in the wintertime. You could easily get a plow and plow away the snow. In a couple of hours, you've got the road cleared. The worst part for here in the lower Hudson Valley are the intense rainstorms. We have many roadways that have bodies of water attached to them with the name. The Sprain Brook Parkway, the Bronx River Parkway,
Sawmill.
the Taconic Parkway. All of these places, whenever it rains to a certain extent, and in some cases, like with the Bronx River, you don't need a whole heck of a lot of rain.
Yeah.
These places flood out very quickly, and immediately these roadways are shut down, not for an hour or two, but sometimes for a whole day or so before the rains finally drain out. With Floyd, I remember it just completely paralyzed the lower Hudson Valley for a couple of days because there was no place you could go. Everything was flooded out. All the major roadways were flooded out as well. And I remember covering that on News 12. That was my first, I guess you could say that was my first really big weather event was Tropical Storm Floyd. And as I said, that was the benchmark for many, many years. Whenever we had heavy rains, my news director, for example, and co-anchor on News 12, Janine Rose, she would sometimes ask me, said, how does this stack up to Floyd? Or how does this compare to Floyd? We said that for many, many years until 2011. And then we had Tropical Storm Irene come our way. and that produced in 2011, August of 2011, similarly very, very heavy rains, which once again closed down many of the roadways in and around the area. And then the very next year, the following year in 2012, we had Sandy. Sandy, I think for the lower Hudson Valley, wasn't too bad a flood threat. We didn't have anywhere near the amount of rain
Or of a wind
up
threat,
here.
right?
But it was the winds. The winds pretty much took down a lot of trees here in the lower Hudson Valley. And there were many places in the lower Hudson Valleys that were out of power for many, many days, which is why I just got a new generator. My old generator was over 20 years old and was starting to show its age. So I said, I better get a new one just in case, because you never know when another Sandy or another big snowstorm that might bring down tree limbs and power lines. I'll tell you, the worst snowstorm I ever had. The worst snowstorm I ever had came in October.
Mm-hmm.
We had a storm in October of 2011.
Oh, 2011. Okay.
2011, just before Halloween.
That's
I
right.
had I had 14 inches of snow, and it wasn't your regular snow. It was the kind of snow that had the consistency of concrete, and it brought down lots of trees and tree limbs on my property. I was out of power for quite a few days. Um, I remember in the midst of that snowstorm going outside, and it sounded like there were hunters out in the woods nearby shooting their rifles. But it wasn't rifle shots, it was tree limbs, the boughs of trees themselves coming down because of the trees still had, for God's sake, leaves on them. Usually late October, early November around here, we have a lot of people who like to go, leaf peeping. They like to look at the beautiful fall colors.
Yeah.
Not that year.
Right.
The only color you saw that year was white on the trees and on the leaves because those trees were coming down. And that was another memorable event to get a snowstorm of that magnitude in October of all times to
Yeah.
get something like that.
Joe, we have a mountain here in the Northeast that's only 6,288 feet. It's in New Hampshire, and it's Mount Washington. And a lot of people are amazed at a mountain that, compared to mountains out west, not a very tall mountain, but it's a mountain known for very severe weather. Could you tell the viewers a little bit about why that is? What is it about Mount Washington that makes it a powerhouse in terms of weather events?
Well, of course, Mount Washington is located in New Hampshire. As you mentioned, it's about 6,200 feet in elevation. And of course, here in the Northeast, here in New England, especially during the wintertime, we are subjected to northeast storms, big storms that develop offshore. Those storms down at ground level sometimes can produce winds of upwards to 40 and 50 miles an hour, sometimes even approaching hurricane strength. But at 6,200 feet above sea level, the winds can be much, much stronger. And indeed, Mount Washington, the all-time record at Mount Washington, and we know it's an all-time record because they have a weather station up at the summit of Mount Washington. And I'll tell you what, that weather station is held down by chains. That particular weather office, in fact, I had a chance to speak with one of the weather observers, Al Oxton. This was many, many, many years ago. He was giving a talk at the Mohonk Mountain House up in New Paltz,
Yep.
and it was a weekend where they were talking about weather, and I was there, and he was showing us slides of what it's like to be. They don't spend just a day. They don't go up there and spend the day and then go down the mountain and go back home. They spend weeks up there in the weather office. And back, I think it was in the 1930s, maybe it was 1934, they recorded on Mount Washington, I think the all-time record of 231 miles per hour.
Yep.
I can't even imagine being anywhere, even in a building, and being subjected to those kind of winds or hearing those kind of winds, hitting you at the tremendous speed. But that's normal for the weather observers who are in the weather station on Mount Washington. Normal for them, typically during the winter, are winds gusting to over 100, 140 miles an hour. I sometimes, when I was on News 12 and also when I was doing weather on radio, I would say, well, you think the winds are bad here with 40 mile an hour winds. I just got the latest observation from Mount Washington. They have winds from the north. They have northwesterly winds sustained at 80, gusting to 145. That's it's
Crazy.
crazy, crazy. They
It's my
also have
understanding.
something you know about. You've ever heard of the term overcast? It's overcast because the clouds are above our heads. It's
Yeah,
completely overcast. Up in Mount Washington, they
yeah,
have what they call undercast
yeah.
because they are above the cloud cover. That's probably an amazing sight where you see literally you go outside and you
See
see
it clouds.
a sea of clouds, and
Yeah.
meanwhile above you it's perfectly clear and with sunshine, or at night a
Mhm.
sky filled with literally thousands of stars.
I think what happened in that event, April 12th, 1934, when they had the 231-mile-an-hour winds, if I'm remembering correctly, I think the anemometer broke.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I think it I
It
think it potentially might
only
it,
if
it
broken
might
was
have been
only
higher.
going at two. It was only going at 230 miles an hour, and the anemometer broke. Well, there you go. They'll have to get a better anemometer next time, I
Yeah, well,
guess.
I have to check on that, but I'm almost pretty certain. But I've had the chance to hike it a few times, and we had in Pinkham Notch, it was like, I don't know, 60 something degrees, and I think it was like 38, 37 degrees at the summit. And I believe when you hike it, you go through 4 or 5 climate zones.
Yeah. Well, we have something known as the dry adiabatic lapse rate, where
Mm,
generally speaking, this is not a given. It's more like an average. But generally speaking, for every 1,000 feet that you go up, the temperature drops 3.5 degrees.
mm.
So, for example, if you were to visit the Empire State Building, it's probably about 3.5 degrees cooler up there on the 86th floor as opposed to down on 34th Street. And sometimes you see, I remember especially with Frank Field when he was on Channel 4 doing the weather, if they would have a camera up on the Empire State Building, they would show you that it was snowing at the top of the Empire State Building. Meanwhile, it was raining down below because the temperatures were milder down at street level, ground level.
Mhm. Joe, how has forecasting changed? A couple of years ago, my brother lives down in the St. Pete area, and they had a couple storms that really came close to hitting them head on. But I was amazed at the
By the
accuracy
way, I don't want to interrupt. Would you like to come and say hello to everybody, dear? Come on,
and who.
I want to introduce you to my wife, who
Oh,
who's also a meteorologist,
hello
and
there,
her name is Renata, and
Renata. Hi, I'm Will Cook. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
we
We are
met
just.
we met at that private weather forecasting company that I went to work for in 1978. She came along a couple of years later, and a couple of years after that, I asked her out on a date, and then a year later, I presented her with a ring, and we in September, on September 1st this year, in spite of the fact that she's my very best friend, we're going to be married 42 years in September.
Congratulations. That's beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming on. And I was just talking to Joe about all the crazy weather that we have in the Hudson Valley, whether it be snowstorms and crazy events like Floyd and stuff. We were also talking about Mount Washington and its impacts on weather and why it's such a severe place. And it's just amazing. And then as you were coming into the room, I was asking him about weather forecasting and if forecasting has gotten better in your estimation over the years, or has the data gotten better? Where are we going as well?
I will tell you one thing, Will, and the fact is that we used to have major fights, the two of us, major arguments, and the major arguments were that we worked at the same company, and we would put out. She would work on forecasts for some, which we were both on radio, and so she would work out some forecasts for some stations, and I would do the same thing, and sometimes we would have conflicts. What do you mean you're calling for snow? Look at the or she would do the same thing to me. So we used to have major, but when we stopped working together in
Went
the
away.
forecasting business, the major arguments ended, and that's probably why we've lasted as long as we have
Oh, I don't know.
for
I don't
42 years.
know.
But I think when we got started back in the well, way back when, we were working with certain computer guidance models which have now been long since phased out in favor of new models which have since come into play. And now these models take into account a lot more data. The algorithms are more complex. And, it's just amazing that we could look at maps. Some of these models show you what the weather might be 10, 15 days in advance. Of course, we never say that that's going to be the case because things change after 10 or 15 days. But it's amazing that we have this ability. Back then, when the two of us were working together, we didn't have radar where we were. Well, the
Oh,
weather company was a rather small weather company, and so we would look at the teletype information, and what we would do is we'd take a grease pencil
And
and
plot the weather, the actual rain cells and thunderstorm cells. We had a grid that we'd put over the map, and we'd actually plot numbers.
oh
It
wow.
would tell us where the rainfall is and the heavy thunderstorms are. It was very medieval.
Did they?
the
Did,
the other
do
night,
they?
That was
just
that was the ancient technology.
I mean, just recently with this.
Now I can get on my phone or iPad even
Right.
far greater detail. And there's just so much out there now, so many forecasting tools, so many different kinds of maps that to look at and to analyze, compare, contrast, and you take averages, between all of them, and there are sites too that we call spaghetti plots for hurricanes.
Right.
There's
Yep.
at least 10 different forecasting tools out there for hurricane tracks, and this one particular tool tries to put it all together
Yeah.
and come out with averages, so to speak.
Do they still send up radiosondes and weather
Oh yes.
balloons?
Oh yes,
Oh yeah.
absolutely. In fact, every single day, twice a day around the world, radio sondes are sent up. And one of the great things about meteorology is that politics, at least we hope that politics don't get into the way of the forecasts. We share our information with Canada. We share with all with Russia and Europe. All of this information goes into these big weather computers, the radio sonde information, and then the various computers, based upon the various equations and algorithms, churn out their version of weather forecast. So we have not just our model, the American model, the GFS, the Global Forecasting System, but there is the European model. There is a model in Japan that comes out each age. We have uh,
Mhm.
models that are put out by Germany, the ICON model. So all of these are looked at by weather forecasters all around the world and are used to formulate their weather forecasts. I say I don't want to bring politics in here, but I'm sorry to say, yes, dear, I know I'm going to have to. That right after this podcast, we have to go upstate to my daughter's home. She just purchased a house, and we have to move furniture. So uh, so I have to. So that's what I'm going to be doing this afternoon. But I hate to say that with politics, in the last couple of years, we have seen, for reasons I still cannot fathom, that various parts of NOAA, the agency that helps to provide our data, has been shut down. You mentioned the radio sondes. There are radio sonde information balloons that carry weather information up into the atmosphere, which we would use to input into those computers. They have been stopped.
Mm.
There are some weather stations that don't do that anymore, or only do that once a day instead of the normal twice a day. There are places where the staffing at various weather service offices have been diminished. People have been sent packing, and I don't understand why. Because the weather service provides more dollar amount for you. I mean, for every dollar that you put in as a taxpayer to the folks over at NOAA, you get back something like $60 or $70 for the information that you get for hurricane forecasts, for weather forecasting, for wintertime weather events such as snowstorms or whatever. All of these weather service offices that are all over the country, they again are taxpayer funded. They come out of the federal government, and for whatever reason, for the last couple of years, there has been seemingly a push toward shutting down some of these offices, stopping the radio sonde information from going into the atmosphere to collect weather information, weather data. I personally don't understand this. But I'm hoping that there will be a reversal of that trend in the coming years, because it makes absolutely no sense. We are we are going to use the words of Spencer Tracy in the movie Inherit the Wind. We're going backwards. We're going backwards by doing this sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's stupid. We're trying to move forward in science, but apparently there are some who believe that science should be pushed back. I don't understand it why, but I'm hoping that that'll change in the coming years ahead.
Joe, is there anything else that you want to give to us? What's next for you, and what's going on with your career at this point forward?
Well, after I left News 12 in 2016. I left because for many decades, News 12 and Cablevision were owned by the Dolan family. The Dolans in 2016 sold to a European consortium known as Altice. And the first thing that Altice did was immediately look at the ledger sheet of people who had been with the company for more than 15 or 20 years and said, well, these people obviously are making the most money, and we don't like paying people a lot of money. And so a lot of us were pink slipped. And so that's why I stopped working at News 12. People say, can't you go back to News 12? No, I can't, because they let a lot of people go. And that situation was something that I could not stop. I tried getting a job at one of the local television outlets, but they don't like people whose college degree dates back to the 20th century. They don't like people, I guess, who have gray hair or white hair. They are catering to a younger demographic.
Yeah.
And so even though I could, Will, I could be a weather forecaster. I could have 100% accuracy. Nobody does. But I could have 100% accuracy. I could tell you, for example, I could predict that there'd be a big snowstorm coming on February 12th of next year at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is going to begin. We get like over a foot of snow, and it would be perfect, 100% correct. I'd still not be able to get a job because, again, that is what the people who run television are looking at. Is they don't want people with a lot of knowledge and a reputation for in the business. They want youth. They want young people, and that's good. I got started when I was only in my 20s. I have nothing against that, but unfortunately, I was unable to get a job. And so what I did was, and my lovely wife said, go to your strong points. And so what I did was I started offering lectures, presentations, virtual presentations online through Zoom. I do presentations on both astronomy and meteorology for libraries and for civic groups, and it has worked out very well for me. I do talks for libraries, and they are often well attended. So I'm enjoying doing that. I do a lot of freelance writing for space.com, for the Old Farmer's Almanac, for other agencies, Natural History Magazine. You mentioned at the start, and I still am. This is my 40th anniversary with the Hayden Planetarium here in New York. I've done lectures for them and taught courses in meteorology for them, and do a lot of other stuff for the planetarium. So I'm still busy. I'm out of broadcasting now because broadcasting doesn't want me. And it was very abrupt. You want to know a good metaphor, a good analogy for this? It's the Flintstones. You ever watch the Flintstones?
Of course.
And at the end of the Flintstones, when they drive home from the drive-in theater and they all walk into the house, and all of a sudden Fred is taken by the big cat, and the big cat drops Fred outside the door and slams the door shut, and he's banging on the door, Wilma, and that's how the show ends.
Yeah.
That's for me. That's how broadcasting was for me.
Okay.
All of a sudden in 2016, I found myself outside with the door slammed shut, and I'm banging on the door trying to get back in. But again, because of my age, I guess, and demographics of TV now, I was unable to get back into television. So, okay, television didn't want me, so I went in another direction. And I'm still providing, as I said, if anybody's interested, if any of you out there know a library who might be interested in having me come on and do a talk, a presentation about weather or astronomy, very happy to do that. And again, I do a lot of freelance writing as well. So again, I keep busy. I'm not into broadcasting anymore, but I still keep busy.
Joe, we love you here in the Hudson Valley. When I mentioned that you were going to be a guest today, a lot of people like eyes went wide, they smiled, and you've been a big part of our lives in our living rooms for many years. So you're a beloved figure here, and I thank you for coming on the show today.
I thank you very, very much for inviting me. I was very happy to talk about. I felt like this is your life, uh, talking about the stuff that has happened in my life and how it's affected me and how it's affected a lot of people out there. I'm very proud to say there was a young lady who used to watch me when she was only like 7 years old. Her name was Kate, and after she used to watch me on television, she'd go over and stand in front of a mirror and make believe that she was Katie the weather girl. And I'm very proud to say, I almost feel like the uncle now. I'm very proud to say that she graduated recently with her PhD in atmospheric science, and I
Wow.
feel like I was at the start of that. And
Yeah.
I know a lot. I know it affected a lot of other young people out there as well. So I'm happy to be on board with you today, Will, and it's great. And I just thank everybody out there. I used to tell people when I was working, they'd come up to me and they'd say, "I watch you all the time at Channel 12," and I used to say, "Keep watching. I need the work." Now that I'm retired, and people come up to me and say, "I loved you on News 12," I tell them simply one thing: thanks for remembering. Thanks for remembering, Will.
You got it. All right, folks, this is Will Cook signing off from the Will to Win podcast. We'll see you soon. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.